Hello friends and welcome. About 60 miles from the front, 16 long-range FP-1 Ukrainian kamikaze drones in 3 waves target a Luhansk civilian college dormitory where teenage students sleep. And Russia's response? Missile destruction of the Belosverska cargo airfield complex, destruction of the 6th automobile repair plant and the Belosverka thermal power plant, together with railway communication and transport hubs in Kiev. Today, it's a little somber. I'm going to talk about something that has been happening this month, which I believe deserves far more attention than it's getting. It's not just about buildings being hit. It's a concerted project to target young people, students, children who are being killed and injured in their places of education. Shortly, we'll be looking at what President Putin had to say about this, and also Russia's massive responsive attack on the Kiev area with 600 drones, 90 missiles, including an Oreshnik. But I want to start by telling you exactly who we're talking about, because these aren't just statistics. These are real lives that have been cut short. On 22nd of May, 2026, at Starobilsk College in Luhansk, a Ukrainian drone strike hit the student dormitory. To date, the count of people who died there is 18, and among them were these young people, according to local reports. Gone forever. 41 others were injured, and a number are still listed as missing. What happened to them is part of a pattern that has played out again and again this May. Let's go through exactly what has happened, because this is not one isolated incident. This is a series of strikes on educational sites, all in rear areas far away from the front lines. First, on 2nd of May, Horlikova Mining College in Donetsk was hit during the night. The strike was directly on student accommodation. 2 people were killed, 14 injured. Afterward, Ukraine claimed there had been a military command post located at the college. However, local residents, teachers, students living and working there all said clearly this was only a college. No soldiers, no bases, no weapons. Ukraine's claim was dismissed by the Russian side. Then, on the 14th of May, it was Krasnaya Luch Technical College, again in Luhansk. This time, the strike hit buildings where students were both studying and sleeping. 3 teenage students were killed, 27 others injured. Once more, Ukraine said this was an ammunition depot. Again, every witness, every teacher, every resident there said the same thing. Classrooms, dormitories, nothing military at all. No evidence from anywhere backs up Ukraine's claim. And on 18th of May, Antratsit Industrial College in Luhansk, a direct hit on a sports hall and admin block. The same story. It's a communications hub, but Russia states there were no antennas, soldiers or equipment. Luckily, nobody died in this attack. And then on the 22nd of May, we saw what happened at Starobilsk College, the attack that killed Sofia, Mikhail, Ksenia, Vladimir, and so many others. And here, international media was present. Reuters journalists were on the ground within hours, photographing the destroyed dormitory, a dormitory, and speaking to survivors and local residents. Their reporting described a site that appeared to be student accommodation with no visible indication of military use. According to local residents and survivors, it was only students and accommodation. 18 dead, 41 injured to date. Some are missing, all civilians, mostly students. In total, in May alone, 4 different colleges have been struck. 25 children have been killed and over 100 people injured. And every single time, the story follows exactly the same script. Ukraine says it was a military target. They claim there were soldiers or weapons or a command post there. And every time, the reality on the ground, confirmed by people who were actually there. Russian officials and independent reporters, it's the same. Destroyed classrooms, shattered dormitories, and dead or wounded students. From the Russian standpoint, this seems not a case of 1 or 2 so-called mistakes. These attacks involve multiple waves of strikes hitting precise coordinates. They appear deliberate. In the face of steady Russian advances on the front, Ukraine has shifted its strategy, it appears, to deep strikes into rear areas. And from that perspective, civilian education sites appear now part of that target list. And what has been the reaction from the rest of the world? You would imagine mostly silence. This is the predictable pattern. Now let's look at what President Putin had to say about these attacks.
No one can say that they were supposedly trying to hit some other target, that our own defenses shot them down and they accidentally hit this building. The strike was not accidental. It came in 3 waves, 16 UAVs at the very same spot. Of course, we will investigate the details. They will be investigated. Appropriate conclusions will be drawn.
He gave a public address directly responding to what had happened, describing the targeting of students and educational facilities as a cowardly and deliberate attack on Russia's future generation. He made it absolutely clear that this would not be ignored and promised firm, proportional retaliation in response. In his speech, he pointed out that when you strike at soft civilian targets like these, you don't weaken your opponent, you only strengthen their resolve. And looking at the reaction across Russia, that is exactly what has happened. These attacks have united public opinion even more strongly behind the military effort. On 24th of May, Russia carried out that massive wave of strikes I mentioned earlier, 600 drones, 90 missiles, including an Oreshnik hypersonic missile, which appear to have no effective defense against them, traveling at well over 5 times the speed of sound, aimed at military and infrastructure targets. And despite the scale of that operation, despite how many weapons were deployed, the listed civilian casualties as of 24th of May are 4 people killed. This is fully verified by official reports, international news agencies, including Reuters, and independent counts. Only 4 civilians lost their lives, even though residential areas did suffer some damage. Of course, the death toll can rise as the story develops. But don't expect photos of where the Oreshnik hit. It's just dust. In previous strikes, images have never been released by Ukraine. Compare that record. If Russia is accused of hitting a school, it's immediately called a war crime, and rightly so if it happens. But when Ukraine hits multiple colleges again and again, killing 25 children, it is described as striking legitimate targets or as collateral damage, or written off as tragic mistakes. What's also interesting is that before any of these attacks on colleges took place, several well-known independent analysts had already warned exactly what would happen.
Guaranteed now that the Russians will retaliate.
They said that if Ukraine continued to build up its drone and missile capabilities supplied from abroad and kept striking deeper and deeper into Russian-held territory, a major Russian response was inevitable. I'm talking about people like Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, Colonel Daniel Davis, a retired US Army officer, Colonel Douglas McGregor, also a retired US Army officer and former senior defense official, and Alexander Mukuris, and of course Jeffrey Sachs, all well-known, respected political and legal analysts. These are from different backgrounds, different views on many issues, and work independently of each other. But on this specific point, they spoke as if with one voice. They all said the same thing. Russia had shown a lot of restraint for a long time, but there was a limit to what it would tolerate. As Ukraine received more and more long-range weapons and started hitting targets that are seen as vital to society or as representing the future, like colleges and students, the likelihood of a massive retaliation grew higher and higher. They pointed out that Western countries supplying these weapons often seem to forget that every time Ukraine's reach increases, the risk of escalation increases right along with it. The attacks on these colleges crossed that line, and the major response those analysts warned about has now arrived. And is today's Oreshnik attack the complete payback? Who knows? Russia has been sending drones and missiles regularly against Ukraine for some time now. These commentators have been predicting bigger, more powerful, and far more devastating responses from Russia for weeks. Perhaps this latest operation was already on the cards, planned well in advance, and the true full-scale retaliation is actually yet to come.
Vancouver. And I believe that a Baltic state will be struck decisively. You hear the rhetoric. The decision-making centers have already been identified. So I believe that an example will be set of a Baltic state, a decisive example.
I can't speak for the civilian leadership in the Kremlin, but the military is looking at this very seriously, seriously enough to discuss nuclear first strike, I think. And definitely strikes on the drone plants inside of the rest of Europe. Even if it risks a conventional world war, well, at this point, it's still better than a nuclear exchange.
And how is Ukraine's deep strike campaign actually working out in practice? There seems to be a big gap between what they hope for and what they are actually achieving. Ukraine has been using drones and missiles constantly to strike deep behind the lines, especially targeting cities like Moscow. At first, these attacks caused alarm and did manage to hit some targets, but recently their effectiveness appears to have dropped dramatically. Why? Because Russia has built up an effective air defense system, especially around its capital and other key centers. Layer upon layer of radar, anti-aircraft missiles, and electronic warfare systems now detect, jam, or shoot down almost everything that comes in. We've seen wave after wave of drones launched towards Moscow, and few of them get through or hit any important or high-value targets. The majority either explode harmlessly in the sky, are intercepted, or crash without causing damage. There are reports from inside Ukraine and from their supporters abroad, but there is growing frustration about this. They spent months building up this capability, receiving billions of pounds worth of equipment and technology from other countries, and yet they simply cannot break through Russia's defenses effectively and regularly. This frustration could be part of the reason for these shifting tactics. If you can't hit military targets or government buildings or supply depots because they are too well protected, what do you do? What can you do? You look for targets that are easy to reach, easy to hit, and will generate headlines. And that brings us right back to where we started. Soft civilian targets like colleges, schools, and residential areas. Hitting these places doesn't give you a military advantage. It doesn't weaken the enemy's army, but it does cause pain. It does create fear, and it does make news. And that is exactly what has happened here. When you can't win on the battlefield or in the air, you turn to attacking students, perhaps, as an option. But that is not strength. It smacks more of desperation. So let's recap what we know clearly and simply. In May 2026 alone, 4 colleges were struck. Orlivka, Krasnaya Luch and Starobilsk, 18 children dead, over 100 people injured. We have named some of those young children: Sofia, Mikhail, Ksenia, Vladimir, Yulia, Kirill, Alina, Nikita, Daria and Anastasia, to remind us exactly what is being lost. We have seen Ukraine repeatedly claim these are military targets, even when no evidence exists, when witnesses deny it, and when international media like Reuters report directly from the scene that there is no sign of military activity. And the world stays, well, pretty silent. It's not really news, is it? We have heard the warnings from Ritter, Davis, McGregor and McCurris that this pattern of strikes could trigger a massive response. Though we also wonder if what we have seen so far is only the beginning. And we have seen the different approach from each side. Russia launching 600 drones and 20 missiles, killing only 4 civilians. Ukraine launching much smaller attacks, repeatedly hitting schools and colleges, killing large numbers of children, and calling it legitimate warfare. There is a viewpoint that sees these attacks as intentional. They have become policy, and they reveal exactly where this conflict stands right now. Ukraine is reduced to targeting the future generation because it cannot gain a meaningful strategic advantage any other way. But one thing appears certain: Russia will respond to each and every so-called terrorist attack. The internal pressure on Russia's leadership to step things up from influential people such as Sergei Karaganov is building. Supporters of the Kremlin argue that Putin has so far acted with great restraint compared with what some Russian hawks are demanding. But there is widespread commentary about Russia considering contingencies that, if applied, could widen this conflict into Europe or beyond and far into the future.